Everyone these days is talking about meditation as if it were some peculiar skill, some extraordinary discipline that one must master like playing the violin or learning mathematics. But the very moment you try to do it, you've already missed the point entirely. You cannot meditate. You simply cannot. The very attempt is already failure, for the simple reason that you, the ego, the thinker, the little voice inside your head, are the very obstruction to meditation itself. Thinking is nothing but a form of inner chatter, like talking to oneself. And as long as that chatter goes on, you remain trapped in a world of abstractions, a world of symbols about reality rather than reality itself. You see, reality is not a thought. It's not a word. It's not a name. Reality is now. And this moment, this eternal present, cannot be grasped by the mind that seeks to capture it. Because the mind can only represent, never experience directly. The trouble, you see, is that most people try to meditate by struggling with their own minds. They sit in their little postures, gritting their teeth, attempting to silence thought to force tranquility. But that's like trying to smooth rough water with a flat iron. The harder you try, the more turbulent it becomes. No, you cannot meditate by effort. You can only allow meditation to happen. In the same way that you allow yourself to listen to the hum of the world without trying to understand it, without naming, without grasping, just listen, just be. And in that effortless being, meditation arises on its own. You see, most people are simply addicted to thinking. That endless chattering inside your skull, words, symbols, images, it never stops. And it is quite literally talking to yourself. Now, if you talk all the time, you never hear what anyone else has to say. And if you think all the time, you never allow yourself to encounter what is real. All you have are your own thoughts about reality, which are merely representations, not reality itself. You live as it were inside a map, mistaking it for the territory. Inside a world of symbols that refer to things, but are not the things themselves. You see a tree and you call it tree. But the word tree is not the living, rustling, swaying reality out there. It's only a noise, a convenient label. This is the basic illusion. The mind constantly labeling separates you from what is. It creates a gap, a gulf between the observer and the observed, between the knower and the known. And in that gap, you feel alienated. You feel alone, cut off from the universe that you are actually inseparable from. You see, it's rather curious. We live in this constant attempt to describe, to name, to control. But reality does not need your commentary. It simply is. And when you are endlessly thinking, you're living in a kind of dream world, never directly touching life, but merely talking to yourself about it. This, you see, is the first great obstacle to meditation. As long as this internal chatter continues, you remain a spectator of your own illusions, never a participant in the living moment. Now, what is reality? That's a very peculiar question, because the moment you ask it, you've already moved away from it. You see, reality is not something that can be captured by thought, by language, or by any form of conceptualization. And music, the moment you name it, you reduce it. Words divide, categorize, create boundaries where none exist. The real world is not made of things or events. Those are inventions of the mind. Out there, it's all just happening. A marvelous system of wiggles and flows endlessly dancing. Take the stars, for instance. We look at the sky and say, here are constellations, but the stars aren't grouped together in the sky. That grouping exists only in your mind. The divisions, the patterns, all are projections of your own symbolic system. Reality itself makes no such distinctions. In truth, there is no ultimate difference between yourself and what you call the external world. The idea that I am something inside this bag of skin, separate from everything else, is simply an illusion, a convention, for you are as much the sunlight as you are the eyes that perceive it. You are as much the air that fills your lungs as the breath that moves within you. But the ego insists on this division. Here I am and there is the world. This separation is at the root of our anxiety, our conflict, our search for control. But reality, the real reality, is utterly free of all this. It is neither spiritual nor material. It is not this or that. It simply is. And the moment you stop trying to grasp it, to define it, you begin to taste it. Now let us speak of this thing called the ego. The I, the separate self that most people imagine themselves to be. The ego, you see, is not a thing. It's not some entity hiding inside your head pulling the levers. The ego is a social convention, a hallucination created by your thinking. It is the thought of I, and when you examine it carefully, you find that it has no substance of its own. It is simply a pattern of tension, a continuous effort of identification and control. When you think, you create the image of a thinker behind the thoughts. When you feel, you create the idea of a feeler behind the feelings. But these are only ideas. Thoughts do not require a thinker, any more than lightning requires someone to operate the thunder. Thoughts arise spontaneously. They happen as clouds form in the sky. The problem arises when we identify with this abstraction. Then is when we believe that the ego is real, solid, permanent, and this identification creates conflict. It creates fear. It creates the desperate urge to control, to improve, to protect something that in truth has no independent existence. The tragedy is that the ego is precisely what tries to meditate. And that's the great joke of it all. The very thing that wants to let go cannot let go. The ego cannot surrender, because surrender would be its own dissolution. You see, meditation cannot be done by the ego. The moment you approach meditation as something you must do, you are reinforcing the very illusion that must evaporate. Meditation is not something you achieve. It is something that happens when the ego exhausts itself and falls silent. Here is where so many go astray. They sit down to meditate with furrowed brows, tense jaws, and anxious minds determined to still their thoughts, to silence the inner noise. But you see, this very act of trying is itself the noise. To try to meditate is like trying to smooth a rough pond with a flat iron. The more you press, the more ripples you create. The water would settle perfectly well on its own, if only you would leave it alone. So too with the mind. And music, people imagine that meditation means the absence of thought, that a blank mind is the goal. But thoughts, you see, are no more a problem than the chirping of birds, or the passing of traffic outside your window. They are simply happenings, part of the great orchestration of life. You don't need to suppress them. You don't need to resist them. You simply observe as you would listen to the wind or watch leaves flutter. You allow the thoughts to come and go without judgment, without grasping, without naming. Meditation happens naturally when you stop interfering. When you stop trying to meditate, you are meditating. It's a paradox, you see. The ego wants to be the master, to be in control even of its own surrender. But surrender is not something the ego can perform. It is what arises when the ego dissolves. Therefore, let go of the effort. Let the mind be as it is. And like a tired bird that eventually quiets its song, your thoughts too will settle when left undisturbed. Music meditation is the art of non-doing, the grace of being. So then, if meditation is not a practice of doing, what is it? It is simply being present with what is without the compulsion to alter, to judge, or to fix. It is in essence a profound listening. You close your eyes and allow the world to pour into you. You hear the faint hum of distant traffic, the whisper of the breeze, the gentle beating of your own heart. And you do not name these sounds. You do not categorize them. You simply receive them. You let your senses play freely without interference from the mind's commentary. You allow your breath to breathe itself without control, without manipulation. You let your body exist as it is. Acts, tensions, sensations without trying to improve or resist any of it. This is the art of non-doing. You are not forcing anything, not aiming for any particular state. You're not trying to achieve tranquility or enlightenment or bliss. You're simply allowing. And in this allowing, something remarkable happens. The boundary between self and world begins to soften. The rigid lines dissolve. You no longer feel like a separate observer watching life from behind your eyes. You become instead part of the happening itself. The breath, the sounds, the thoughts, all part of one continuous process. In this you rediscover your original nature, effortless, spontaneous, free. You are not a fragment trapped in a skin bag called me, but rather a manifestation of the whole universe, a wave upon the vast ocean of being. Meditation, you see, is not a task to master, but a mystery to sink into. It is the effortless grace of simply being here now without trying to be anywhere else. Now, One of the simplest and most beautiful ways to slip into this effortless state is through the act of listening. Not listening for something, not listening to identify, but simply listening. You see, sound is marvelous because it requires nothing of you. The world is full of sounds, and they are happening whether you participate or not. The cars passing, the wind through the trees, the rustle of your own breath, all of it is there. And if you allow your ears to open, simply open, you begin to hear these sounds not as distractions, not as separate incidents, but as one continuous symbol. You do not label them. That's a bird. That's a car horn. That's my stomach rumbling. No, you allow sound to be pure vibration. You listen as you would listen to music, not analyzing, but receiving. And if you find yourself thinking, which you will, you listen to your thoughts as though they too are sounds, a kind of interior humming, like birds twittering outside your window. You neither suppress nor indulge. You let them come and you let them go. In this act of listening, without grasping, without commentary, you fall effortlessly into meditation. The mind no longer struggles. The ego, which always wants to understand, to control, to manipulate, finds nothing to cling to, and slowly, quietly it dissolves. You discover in this listening that you are not a separate listener standing apart from the world. You are simply part of the vibration. The ears and the sound are one process. Meditation happens when you listen not to achieve silence, but to hear the music of existence itself. And breathing holds a profound secret. Most take it entirely for granted. After all, it happens continuously, day and night, without conscious effort. Yet, at any moment, you can decide to alter it, to hold your breath, to breathe deeply, to quicken or slow the rhythm. It exists in a strange borderland, both under your control and entirely independent of it. This peculiar nature of breath offers a glimpse into the artificial distinction between what we call self and what we call world. Ordinarily, there is a firm division in the mind. On one side, things I do, on the other, things that happen to me. But breathing unsettles that neat separation. Am I breathing, or is breathing happening? The more attentively you observe this rhythm, the more that old division begins to blur. Breathing is not an isolated act performed by a little me inside a body. It is part of a much larger process. The air entering your lungs was stirred by the trees. The oxygen carried into your bloodstream was once part of a great atmospheric dance involving oceans, forests, and sunlit skies. Breathing is participation in a cosmic circulation. This realization extends beyond respiration. Your entire organism, the beating of your heart, the movement of your digestion, even the involuntary twitches of your muscles, operates as an intricate system that never once asked for your permission. The thought that you are in control is only a narrow spotlight of conscious attention and scanning the vast mystery of your existence. Here lies one of the great revelations of meditation. As you simply watch your breath, neither guiding it nor interfering, the unarises that the apparent boundary between what I am doing and what is happening to me is arbitrary. The breath breathes itself, and in that effortless flow the illusion of a separate controller begins to dissolve. This is not a philosophical abstraction. It is something directly experienced when attention settles into stillness. Watching the breath without interfering is a mirror for life itself. Life moves through you. The heart beats, the lungs fill, sensations arise. None of these require your effort, and in that effortless happening, there is no solid I pulling the strings, only the continuous dance of existence. As this understanding deepens, meditation ceases to be a practice of control. It becomes a surrender to what has always been unfolding without your grasp. People are always trying to get somewhere. They imagine that life is a kind of journey, a long road leading towards some final destination, enlightenment, success, salvation, or ultimate happiness. But this entire way of thinking is built on a fundamental misunderstanding. In music, the purpose is not to reach the end of the composition. If that was so, the finest musicians would be those who played the fastest. The meaning of music is in the playing itself, the unfolding of each note, each pause, each crescendo. The joy of music is not in arriving, but in the movement, the flowing patterns of sound. The same is true of dancing. No one dances to arrive at a particular spot on the floor. If that were the purpose, people would simply choose the shortest route and stand still. The dance exists entirely for its own sake. The movement is the meaning. But most approach life as though it were a race, as though everything exists for the sake of arriving somewhere better somewhere else. This striving keeps them perpetually unsatisfied, forever chasing a future that never arrives. For tomorrow is always one day away, and the horizon recedes as you approach it. In truth, life is much more like dancing than like traveling. Every moment is complete in itself. Every experience is the point. The striving itself creates the illusion of incompleteness. The moment one imagines there is something to attain, one steps out of the flow of life and becomes anxious, restless, disconnected. Meditation reveals this directly. When you sit quietly, not chasing thoughts, not grasping for results, you discover that the present moment is entirely sufficient. There is nowhere to go, nothing to achieve. The now contains everything. This is why genuine meditation has no goal. The ego, always concerned with improvement, demands progress. It wants to meditate to become wiser, more peaceful, more enlightened. But this desire is rooted in the illusion of becoming, of movement toward an imagined end. In stillness, it becomes clear you are already here. There is no elsewhere. Life is not a path, it is a rhythm. Not a pursuit, but a play. And when this is seen, the weight of striving lifts, replaced by the simple joy of being present, fully engaged in the dance of existence. For most, the great fear beneath all fears is death. The notion of slipping into eternal nothingness, of being extinguished like a candle flame. The mind conjures the terrifying image of an endless darkness, a vast emptiness where no experience remains. But this fear is built upon a false premise that there exists a solid separate I that can be lost. Ask yourself, where were you before you were born? Can you recall any sense of non-existence? Of course not. There was no awareness of absence. Just as you have no awareness of the inner workings of your liver, or the turning of the planets. And they happen without your knowing, without your effort. When you imagine death, you project the idea of continued awareness into a state where awareness itself is absent. But non-existence is not an experience you can have. You do not experience being dead any more than you experience not yet being born. Consider sleep. When deep in dreamless sleep, where does you go? There is no fear, no longing, no pain, only an absence of differentiation. Then you awaken and the world appears again, as if summoned into being. But in truth, the world was never separate from you, and birth and death are not absolute boundaries, but movements in a continuous flow. Just as waves rise and fall upon the ocean, each being emerges and dissolves back into the great totality. The wave was never separate from the ocean. It was always water, always part of the larger movement. This sense of separation, of being a distinct, isolated entity, navigating a foreign world, is the root of suffering. The ego insists on its independence, but this independence is an illusion maintained by thought. When thought quiets, the illusion dissolves, and what remains is unity. In the deepest silence, one sees that life and death are not opposites but complements. Part of a single process without beginning or end. The universe breathes in beings and breathes them out again. Each birth is not a new other arriving, but another face of the same underlying reality. When this is understood not as an idea but directly felt, death loses its sting. The fear of annihilation melts away, replaced by the quiet wonder of being part of an eternal unbroken whole. Nothing has been gained or lost. There is only this endless, marvelous happening. The essence of meditation, indeed of all wisdom, lies in letting go, not as a technique, not as something you must do, but as the natural result of understanding the impossibility of control. From childhood, we are taught to grasp, to hold tightly, to seek security, mastery, and permanence. The mind clings to ideas, to possessions, to identities. The ego constructs its fortress of me and mine, always vigilant, always tense. But the harder one holds, the more fragile it becomes. Letting go is not an act of sacrifice. It is not resignation or defeat. It is liberation from an impossible task, the futile effort to control what was never truly yours to manage. Life moves of its own accord. Thoughts arise unbidden. Sensations fluctuate. Circumstances shift without consultation. The world dances freely, and you are never its master. Meditation reveals this by allowing everything to be as it is. Thoughts wander, emotions stir, sounds fill the space. Yet none of it requires your interference. The breath breathes itself, the heart beats on, the world continues to turn, and as this truth deepens, and the compulsion to manage every detail slowly dissolves, true freedom emerges not from domination, but from participation, from becoming part of the flow rather than standing apart from it. The separation between self and world softens until the boundary disappears altogether. When the grip of control loosens, something remarkable is discovered. A profound harmony beneath the apparent chaos. Even conflicts, pains, and losses reveal their place in the greater rhythm. The so-called discord of life is simply the necessary contrast that gives rise to the beauty of the whole, like shadows defining light or silence defining music. This is why the great traditions speak of enlightenment not as an attainment, but as a return to what was always present, hidden beneath the restless grasping of thought. It is the simple recognition that you are already home, already part of the totality that requires no improvement. In letting go, the heavy burden of self dissolves. There is no longer anyone struggling to meditate, no one seeking to arrive. There is only the effortless grace of being utterly complete, profoundly free. And so at last we come full circle. The great misunderstanding is that meditation is a tool, a means by which one might become more peaceful, more enlightened, more successful, or somehow more perfected. This is the language of striving, the subtle whisper of the ego, still plotting its escape, still seeking to improve itself, as though it were a flawed machine in need of repair. But meditation in its truest form has nothing to do with self-improvement. It is not a ladder one climbs. It is not a technique to acquire control or mastery. The very impulse to get better is precisely what keeps one trapped in restlessness. The truth is wonderfully simple. There is nothing to attain. There never was. The search itself is the obstacle. The striving is the suffering. The illusion is the idea that this moment, just as it is, could somehow be incomplete. Meditation is simply allowing life to be exactly as it is without resistance. It is not a practice of becoming, but of dissolving. Dissolving the illusion of the separate self. Dissolving the clinging mind that forever chases a better future. When that dissolves, what remains is the present. Not as a concept, not as a moment in time, but as the timeless reality of being. This is why it has been said, when you stop trying to meditate, meditation happens. Not because you have achieved something, but because you have relinquished the effort. The silence was always there beneath the noise of grasping. Life is not a problem to be solved, nor a journey to be completed. It is music to be heard, a dance to be danced, an unfolding that requires no purpose beyond itself. And in this very moment, as you sit, as you breathe, as sounds arise and fade, meditation is already occurring. No effort is necessary, no attainment is waiting. There is only this. The play of existence continues, and you, like a wave upon the sea, are part of its endless, effortless rhythm.